Hello, pushers. This video is to help recap the sections covered during the week, but more importantly, to talk about the last section that I was not able to cover on Friday. This is for Chapter 7, Hammering Out a Federal Republic, 1787 to 1920. We begin with the first section, the political crisis of the 1790s, which is basically encompassing the different obstacles, challenges that the first president met, that the first government met. So we saw the election of George Washington as the first president of the United States. He's elected in 1788 by unanimously elected by the Electoral College, and we talked in class of why the founders, the fathers of the Constitution, eventually entered this Electoral College piece into the Constitution. He wins. He's elected in 1788, but is inaugurated into the presidency in 1789. John Adams is elected as vice president. And just to remember, earlier that month, or earlier that year in 1788, in June of 1788, the Constitution is ratified, 9 states to 13 out of the 13, making it the government of the United States. And we also need to remember that Washington had retired from as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army in 1783. So 5 years pass where he's in retirement and eventually is called upon to lead the nation in the presidency. As president, he felt that he needed help, so he eventually assigns a cabinet, so his departments, Thomas Jefferson, Department of State, Alexander Hamilton, head of Treasury, Henry Knox, Secretary of War, and somebody that we added, Edmund Randolph, which was the Attorney General at the time. And then we also see the establishment of a judicial act to be able to build and create a court system, Supreme Court and lower level courts, and also assigning John Jay as Chief Justice of the United States of America. The Constitution, like I said, is ratified in 1788, but the Bill of Rights is added in 1791, which is basically the protection on individual rights. Under Article 5, the Constitution has the ability to change with time. So in 1791, we basically see the first 10 changes of the Constitution known as the Bill of Rights. Reminder that one of the crises of the 1790s is the financial program by Alexander Hamilton. I remember Hamilton establishes a national debt where he basically takes on the war debt from all the states, any debt that is owed to foreigners, and then any kind of national debt. So there's war debt by state, and there's war debt by the national. So basically creating a national debt, and he also creates a national bank, which eventually is in charge of printing money, assigning loans to businesses. It also establishes a line of credit with other countries. So he eventually is also in part imposes excise taxes, which are basically superfluous taxes that are basically cost on items that are not non-essential, like cigarettes or liquor and stuff like that. So remember, there was a division between the people involved in the government based out of Hamilton's financial program. You kind of see a split. You see the creation of factions. You have the Federalists, who are led by Hamilton, and then you have the Republicans, who now we call Democratic Republicans or Jeffersonian Republicans. They are going to be in charge of they're going to be separated from the Federalist. Thomas Jefferson is joined by James Madison, so just a kind of connection. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were the ones who wrote the Federalist Papers that encouraged the creation of the Constitution, but now they sit on opposite parties. So remember, Hamilton is more centralized government, more into manufacturing, that he feels manufacturing will lead the country into success, while Thomas Jefferson and James Madison feel like the state government should be more powerful and there should be a need of decentralizing the government. They're more into the farming, agricultural industry being the head or the lead in American success. Remember that one of the issues that arises is the creation of factions or political parties. Uh, George Washington, upon his leaving of the White House, his farewell address, he points out that we should not be forming factions because that would divide the nation, which is kind of something what we're seeing today and was seen back then. The creation of the Federalist or the establishment of the Federalist, and then the Republicans, kind of separate the country. In 1796, you see John Adams winning the election. He's a Federalist, was the vice president to George Washington. And then you have Thomas Jefferson, who eventually becomes the vice president, because back then the election by the Electoral College, number one vote getter would be president, number two vote getter will be the vice president. So you created basically a presidency of rival parties. And then the big issue really comes in the election of 1800. So a big problem arises for Americans. It eventually generates a second change after the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. The 12th Amendment eventually establishes that the vice president and president should be from the same political party. So the problem that arises in the election of 1800 is that there was a tie in the electoral votes. You had Thomas Jefferson, a Republican, tied with Aaron Burr as a Republican. So the issue was who's the tiebreaker. Well, who's chosen as president and who's vice president. So eventually, there was a huge debate over who should take over, and eventually, Alexander Hamilton was given the right to choose who would be. Even though he was a big rival of Thomas Jefferson, he chooses Thomas Jefferson as president and Aaron Burr as the vice president. And he felt that Aaron Burr was not competent to run a country, and that's why he chose him as the vice president. So, because of the election of 1800, you see the formation of the 12th Amendment that creates the split. Now, as you see in this ballot, you have the president who's running for president and the vice president in one vote, right? One ballot. They're not all separated. So Amendment 12 basically changes that number one vote getter gets presidency, number two vote getter gets the vice presidency. So now they're all lumped together. President and vice president are in one together, as you can see in the ballot here. And the last crisis that happens in the 1790s is after John Adams becomes president, he passes a series of acts. One of the most important ones was the Alien Act, which eventually causes it gives the power to the president to deport any non-citizen out of the country. One of the issues that was brought upon by the Republicans was that most of the political enemies of John Adams were were immigrants, and so he felt like Jefferson felt that there was an attack on the party by wanting to remove these the the immigrants when deport them from the United States. So a part of the Alien Act also came the Sedition Act, which gave the power to the president, to the government to imprison or detain anybody who they saw a threat to the government. And so, in combination, the Alien Sedition Acts basically were attacked on the political enemies of John Adams, and as we will see later on during World War I, we will see the Alien and Sedition Acts making a resurgence. So, as a response to these acts, the states of Virginia and Kentucky eventually passed resolutions. Both Thomas Jefferson and James Adams, James Madison, will help write these resolutions. And within the resolution is a clause that says the nullification clause. So basically, that state governments, can nullify, reject, void any federal laws. And this was a kind of, again, a confrontation between federal and state powers.